One report sent to the government's secret UFO headquarters in Room 801 was from a 16-year-old girl in Somerset. The files revealed that from the window of her parents' home, she had witnessed a strange craft that emitted an eerie, glowing light.
I said to the family I'd sent off a letter, and they said, oh, well, nothing will come of it. No, that's nothing. And then I was most surprised to get a letter back saying that they were going to send a gentleman to see me. I felt quite chuffed, to be honest, that somebody was coming to see. Anyway, this chap turned up, and to my disappointment, he didn't have a uniform on. I just thought he would be from the RAF and would be in uniform, but he wasn't.
I think it's quite interesting to speculate that when somebody from the Ministry of Defence perhaps knocked on someone's door and said, I've come here to talk to you about your UFO sighting, and I'm sure these people would be smartly dressed, probably in dark suits, and it seems to me that this is the genesis of the so-called Men in Black.
I can't remember if he had identification. I think he must have done, because I'm quite sure my mother wouldn't have let me see a strange man without being pretty sure he was somebody. But he, if I remember rightly, he wore a dark suit, he came in a dark car.
The mysterious man from the ministry proceeded to question the young Henson about what she thought she had seen.
He wanted to talk to me about the thing, what I'd seen. I described it, and he decided he would come back that night to try and see it. And of course it was a cloudy night, so he couldn't see it. So he came back, I think, 2 or 3 nights in a row to try and see it. But it was cloudy each time, by which time I was feeling a bit of a fool, to be honest. But anyway, he said, well, not to worry, but he said not to say anything to anybody else, because wasn't quite sure whether there was anything there, and I didn't want to feel a fool, naturally. So he said, you know, don't mention it to your school friends or anything, and when you're 16, in that time, you didn't.
These investigations were carried out by Air Force special investigators from the Provost and Security Services. Now, the Provost and Security Services are the RAF police. Their special duties include counterintelligence.
Well, I don't suppose that we've tried to silence anyone about UFOs, but then, having said that, back in those Cold War days, there probably was a request perhaps not to talk about things too much. I think it's just the culture of the times.
I didn't hear anything for some time, and then eventually a letter came to say that I had discovered, if I remember rightly, a new planet, which I was well chuffed about, but they gave it a number. And I remember thinking, why didn't they call it after me? Because they call other planets after people who discover them. Why give mine a number?
It may have been easy for the ministry to dismiss the claims of a schoolgirl, but it would not be so easy to pull the wool over the eyes of the royal family. In the mid-1950s, the Duke of Edinburgh began taking a keen interest in the subject of UFOs. Fortunately for him, his personal equerry, Sir Peter Horsley, was also a high-ranking military man who had access to some remarkable contacts and astonishing information.
He was at one time investigating UFO reports in the main operations centre at the Ministry of Defence as part of his duties, and he gave some of these reports to the Duke of Edinburgh.
Knowing how the household works, if Prince Philip wanted some information, the natural chap to ask would have been his equerry. And so he may have said to Peter Horsley, find out what you can about these UFOs, for heaven's sake. I keep reading about them, which he would then have done. He did have an interest in this. I wouldn't say it was a consuming one or a permanent one, but he asked 1 or 2 questions, which of course got prominence really out of proportion to their actual worth, simply because he was the Duke of Edinburgh.
Horsley, in his role as Deputy Chief of Strike Command, had his finger on the nuclear trigger. One day a colleague by the name of General Martin telephoned him and asked him to go to the Chelsea home of a curious woman by the name of Mrs. Markham. She was playing host to a Mr. Janus, a man who had something of the utmost importance that needed to be discussed with Horsley in person. Intrigued, he left the palace on a wet and misty night, taking a path that was to lead to an extraordinary encounter.
As he thought it might have something to do with the royal family, he went. And he was sitting in this flat, which was apparently a well-furnished, quite nice flat in a good address, when in came a chap whom he'd never seen before in his life. He was not by any means inquisitive, but he was a very keen, intelligent man, and he and Horsley had a very interesting talk.
Their conversation covered UFOs and atomic warfare.
He made it clear to Horsley that he knew a great deal of things which Horsley knew, but which were secret, perhaps even top secret.
Janus's knowledge sent a shiver down Horsley's spine.
He knew all Britain's nuclear secrets at that time. So obviously he found this very disturbing, and the first thing he did was to report it to Buckingham Palace when he went back to the palace.
When the Duke heard about the case, the strange encounter was considered to be a security risk. Horsley was immediately dispatched to the house in Chelsea to question Janus again.
When he went back to the address, it had become quite different, not at all what he'd seen on the night in question.
The room had been vacated apparently. He could not find the person with whom he'd been at the meeting. And of course the guy from elsewhere had disappeared as well. So it remained a mystery, but it was very disturbing for him.
This was an astounding experience, related by a man whose integrity is beyond question.
For Horsley, the most chilling aspect of the encounter was the feeling that Mr. Janus was reading his mind. This led